Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
Today, as we focus on the lives of indigenous peoples in Asia, particularly in Nepal, their rich culture, language, and religion are widely celebrated. However, they often face systemic exclusion and racial discrimination. Their languages are marginalized, and they are frequently excluded from decision-making processes. This struggle reflects a broader pattern across the Asian continent, where indigenous people's voices are often overlooked. Despite these challenges, their resilience remains strong. This day is not only for reflection, it is also a call to action for real justice. To understand the significance of the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination for Nepal's indigenous peoples and across Asia, I spoke with Prabindra Shakya, the convener of Asia Indigenous Peoples Network on Extractive Industries and Energy, a regional network of indigenous defenders providing solidarity and support to communities resisting the impacts of state and corporate-led extractive and energy projects across Asia.
I'm Prabindra Shakya. I belong to Indigenous Newar people. We are the natives of Kathmandu Valley and some surrounding areas in Nepal. I'm the convener of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Network on Extractive Industries and Energy, APNI. It is a regional network of indigenous defenders and their organizations or groups that are working with or supporting extractive and energy projects affected communities across 10 countries or territories in Asia for advocacy of their rights. On this International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, I express solidarity with all peoples and communities fighting racism and promoting equality worldwide. Observed annually to commemorate Sharpeville Massacre in 1960 in South Africa, when police opened fire on a peaceful protest against apartheid laws killing 69 people, this day is still very relevant for indigenous peoples and other historically oppressed communities across Nepal. That is because for indigenous peoples and other marginalized communities in Nepal, discrimination is a lived experience based on culture, ethnicity, language, race, and other grounds to date. In Nepal, the so-called high caste Hindu groups have held on to dominate state structures as well as socio-economic and political powers, and they are even recognized and protected as per constitutional provisions. On the other hand, there are continued violations of the rights of indigenous peoples, particularly to their lands, territories, and resources that they have been dispossessed of in the context of state building, and continued push for so-called development and environmental conservation, including with the use of militarization. For example, indigenous Newar communities in ancient towns of Kokana and Bungamati in the south of Kathmandu have been fighting for their rights against the fast-track expressway and other ill-planned infrastructure projects on their lands for more than a decade now that threaten to displace them. Similarly, indigenous communities across the country are displaced from their lands and resources or negatively impacted in other ways in the name of hydropower development and protected areas, among various other reasons. Indigenous communities and their defenders that raise their voices against violation of their rights are wrongly tagged as anti-development and even anti-national and face various other forms of reprisals. In Nepal and across Asia, the main challenges that indigenous peoples face with racial or ethnic discrimination are that they are not recognized as distinct peoples with rights as guaranteed under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and other international instruments. Those include their rights to lands, territories, and resources, to free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, and to self-determination, among others. On the other hand, states continue to pursue land and other laws guided by colonialism and neo-colonialism to oppress indigenous peoples and other marginalized communities. In Nepal, although the state ratified Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention of the International Labour Organization, or the ILO Convention 169, and voted in favor of the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007, the provisions of these international standards have not yet been domesticated in national laws and policies even after almost 2 decades. And for that, dominant political forces and sectors of society lack political will, while they have even weakened the indigenous peoples movement along ideological and other lines. Those prevent as the biggest legal and systemic barriers that prevent indigenous communities from having full equality. To truly protect the rights and dignity of indigenous peoples of Nepal, policy changes are needed to recognize and promote their rights, particularly to their lands, territories and resources. That is because lands and resources are central to the identity and survival of indigenous peoples. That will also pave the way for advancing other rights of indigenous peoples, including for protection against discrimination and to development in line with self-determination. I again express my solidarity with all peoples and communities fighting against racism and promoting equality on this International Day for the elimination of racial discrimination. Fight against racism, stand for equality.
For more information on the rights of Indigenous peoples, visit cs.org and follow Cultural Survival on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, and Blue Sky.